for all the work that you do, to everyone really that's been a part of the Connecticut Green Party, and really to all of you for whatever it is that you do, because I know that you don't come to be in this room by accident. It's a very special test of character that you have found your way here. And I want to thank you and congratulate you for creating this movement that has brought us to where we are right now. And I really see the Green Party and our campaign as very much just a part of that movement. The real engine of social change and transformation is always a movement. It's a social movement, whether the abolition movement, or the labor movement, or the women's movement. It is a social movement which is really the driver. And I very much see politics and electoral endeavors as a voice of that movement. The real engine is the movement, but it's really important that it have a voice. In the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. And if we don't stand up and make that demand in the political arena, we will be steamrolled. And all the work that we do, all the struggle in the streets, in workplaces, in colleges and universities, it will all be kind of, sidelined and dismantled if we don't also struggle in the halls of power. So I congratulate you for being a part of that struggle and taking us to where we are now, which is such an amazing historic moment where this struggle for democracy and justice really is sweeping the planet and sweeping the nation, from the Black Lives Matter to the movement to cancel student debt to the movement against these wars on terror that know no end, the pipeline blockades, the living wage campaigns, the list goes on. There's a very powerful movement. And that movement comes very much in response to this moment of crisis that we're in. And that crisis really encompasses all walks of life, our economy, our ecology, peace, and democracy. We're really in a moment of very deep and convergent crisis, and it's very important that we fight back. I think the critical thing is that fight back has to happen in a political party that actually supports that fight. There are other campaigns out there right now, that are driving towards that revolution. But the question we have to ask is, can you have a revolution inside of a counter-revolutionary party? I don't think you can. And, the question I'm sure will be put to you as it's being put to me, will we just roll over in the event that the Sanders campaign actually gains the nomination, which is highly unlikely for reasons we can talk about. The Democrats have a kill switch that they have effectively used against rebel candidates for the past many decades, whether it's superdelegates or Super Tuesdays or smear campaigns and fear campaigns like they used for Howard Dean. Anybody remember the Dean scream?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, same thing for Jesse Jackson, who had actually won 12 major primaries in Midwestern states. So a campaign that had a big head of steam, they were also capable of taking down. So it's the overwhelming likelihood. So this is not the time to pledge allegiance to a political party that at its very best supports a military budget that is bankrupting us financially and morally. And let me just say a word about that. People probably know in this room how much we spend, what portion of our discretionary budget is being spent on the military, these wars for oil that are doing us so much good. 54%, basically. So it's the majority of the discretionary budget. But what I didn't know until just the other day when I actually looked it up is how big is the next biggest priority in the budget. Does anybody know that?
Yes, yeah.
Well, it turns out after 53, 54% for the military, the next biggest thing is 7%. And there are a whole bunch of little 7% expenditures. But it tells you basically our entire discretionary budget is really devoted to this empire building, this military, which is so harmful to the cause of security for everyone around the world, including us. So this is not the time to pledge allegiance to a party under the best of circumstances, even with the Sanders campaign, who does not challenge that military budget, has not said a peep about that in the course of this campaign. So, you know, I think we are withholding, we are challenging that, that ideology that says that militarism is the way forward, that the wars on terror, which are only creating more terror, are the ways forward, which they're certainly not. That maintaining an entire generation in a state of debt, a perpetual state of debt, student debt, predatory debt, which should be canceled. Isn't it time that we bailed out the students? We bailed out the bankers. We bailed out the bankers who got us into this mess to the tune of now supposedly $16 trillion in bailouts, in basically free money, cheap loans, etc., that have been used to scoop up the bad debt of the bankers and big finance. So to bail out the students, it would be $1.3 trillion, which is tiny compared to what we've been spending on the crooks who got us into this mess. They should be put in jail, and the students should be liberated from debt. That's how that ought to go. On education, the Democratic Party, and including the Sanders campaign, support privatization and an agenda of high-stakes testing. When the No Child Left Behind bill was renewed this summer, there were a series of amendments that would have cut back on high-stakes testing, that would have allowed an opt-out. And the entire Democratic Party, including its progressive leadership, all voted against those amendments that would have restricted high-stakes testing, that would have restricted privatization. So that's another reason why we don't just roll over here on the railroad tracks and let the train come. On human rights violations and war crimes, which we are supporting for the Saudis, to whom we have sold $100 billion worth of arms over the last 10 years. $100 billion. That is the majority of weapons that are going to the Middle East. And the Saudis are basically a conduit then to all parties, including terrorist groups. So we are providing funds and we are providing arms, basically, to all sides of the conflict, including the terrorists. It may be the terrorists we call the good terrorists, but we do not want to be in the business of funding global jihadism, which is what we are doing by funding and working with and selling weapons to the Saudis. So that is another reason why we don't want to simply roll over here. And do you have a little glass of water you can steal? Thank you. And finally, one last point of difference is on Edward Snowden. You know, all of the other candidates support criminalizing whistleblowers. We think they should be declared heroes and celebrated.
Yeah.
Yes. So I just wanted to clarify right off the bat, you know, why we're here today and why we are not going away. And, you know, it's clear that we are in a state of emergency. Economically, you know, we have this so-called recovery, but truly we are in a state of emergency. How many think we're in a recovery out there? Yeah, nobody I know is in recovery. You know, the top 1% perhaps is in recovery. And in fact, you know, wages now for working people, thank you, Linda, are barely above poverty level. That's where average wages are right now. The jobs that have come back have been mostly low wage, temporary and part-time jobs. Temporary jobs are now at an all-time record high. They've never been as high as they are right now. So while unemployment rates are going down, the kinds of jobs that we have are just not sustainable. And in fact, 40% of workers now, this is staggering, 40% of workers are making under $20,000 a year, which is not enough to stay out of poverty. Household wealth has been cut by 40% compared to before the crash. And the average family now cannot, in fact, it's 2/3 of families could not afford an emergency $500 expense, like if you had to go to an emergency room and do your copay. So that's how much of a recovery we have, and it's clear, people are really hurting from that. We have African Americans who are facing, basically taking their lives in your hand if you get in a car or you walk down the street from this epidemic of police violence. Immigrants are facing the potential for mass deportations, and 43 million young people and not so young people are locked into predatory debt without a way to get out of it in the current economy. We are the only campaign that calls for canceling student debt. All the other candidates, including the Sanders campaign, they will change the rate of interest, but they will not cancel the debt, which is basically unjustified debt. It was a bad deal. Young people were promised, you do your part, you'll have a good job. Those good jobs aren't there, so it's time to basically cancel that contract, because higher education is something we should be providing anyhow as a basic human right for all. Clearly what people are facing is a series of crises right now. And in addition, these wars for oil that are consuming so much of our budget. In fact, the cost of these wars for oil, anybody know what it's come to over the past 15 years? It's $6 trillion, basically, according to several major academic studies. That boils down to $75,000 per household, on average. So most people don't know that. People are not crazy about these wars to start with and have to be fear campaigned into them and goaded into them. But the reality is that we are paying, to the chin for these wars, but they are only making us less secure, not more secure. And in fact, we've not only paid the $6 trillion, tens of thousands of American soldiers have been killed or maimed, and we have actually killed over 1 million people in Iraq alone, not winning us the hearts and minds of people in the Middle East and around the world. And what do we have to show for it? Nada. Failed states, mass refugee migrations, an absolute crisis, 60 million people who are basically fleeing war and poverty, largely as a consequence of U.S. policies. In the last year alone, 60 million people. This is absolutely staggering. It's a humanitarian disaster. It is tearing the European Union apart at the seams and causing an incredible refugee crisis in this country. And let me say, for those who say, well, we've got a refugee crisis, we got to fix it. The way to fix it is to stop causing it.
Yes.
We know very much this refugee crisis is caused by regime change, by U.S. and CIA-sponsored coups, military intervention, the 3 countries in Latin America that are the real source of the immigrant flows right now, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, are all countries where we either had a CIA-sponsored coup or otherwise a military intervention. So, hello, let's connect the dots here. We're creating the chaos that's turning masses, millions of people into refugees for either their lives or for economic survival. And when they come here, fleeing our predatory policies, we criminalize them. This is absolutely unacceptable. It's time to create a welcoming path to citizenship and stop driving people out of their homes. And one other thing that this war on terror, war has created, besides the failed states, the refugee flows, it has made the terrorist crisis far worse. Remember, this goes back to Afghanistan in the 1970s, when the CIA and the Saudis collaborated to make trouble for the Russians, who were there kind of messing with Afghanistan because we were doing the same thing. So, it's this kind of cloak and dagger foreign policy that goes way back. We and the Saudis got together and created global jihadism, basically, and helped the Mujahideen establish a global resistance to Russia. So it was US funds and weapons along with the Saudis that provided training, and we created an international jihadi force. And what came out of that? Well, out of that, you got Al-Qaeda, which was initially a local force, but after these recent wars, it is now a global force. And it has a gazillion offshoots in every area of the world, basically. And you have the Taliban in Afghanistan, which are far more powerful and control more territory today than they did when we first started throwing weapons into this 15 years ago. And actually, even from before then as well. So this policy is an incredible catastrophe. And it is absolutely incomprehensible that all of the other presidential candidates, other than the Greens, are basically calling for more of what has created this unbelievable disaster. So it's time for us to say, enough of this cycle of violence. We're actually calling for a peace offensive. Not just, throwing up our hands and walking away, but actually undoing the damage that we have actively been causing. So that means we stop selling arms to all parties in the Middle East. How about a weapons embargo to the Middle East? And there is definitely the potential to bring the Russians along on this, as Kerry found he was just able to do the other day in calling for a ceasefire. You may remember, if you were paying attention, that the Russians were trying to create a peace process going way back to like 2012. We're trying to create a peace process to avoid this. So there are ways that we can work with the Russians on this, and between the two of us really engage all parties to stop all weapons sales, to just shut down the militarization of the Middle East. There's a lot we can do also to shut down the funding of these terrorist forces that we are so concerned about, because who is sending the funds for this? Well, we know who funded 9/11. That was coming from the Saudis. There's no question about that. And it turns out that the Saudis, we say that we've been telling them to clean up their act. They have not cleaned up their act. And some of the Secretary of State cables that were leaked by WikiLeaks have Hillary Clinton basically saying as much herself, that the Saudis are still the major funders of terrorism around the world. The New York Times just ran an investigative article about this on January 23rd, if you want to check it out, about how the Saudis are funding terrorism and how they are funding the war in Syria. They are basically funding the rebels. We are arming them through the Saudis, to whom we basically sell all these weapons. So we've got this game going where we're playing both sides. Whether it's intentional or whether it's just inadvertent, we're kind of throwing, using a flamethrower here on the Middle East. So we can shut down this war. We can stop ISIS in its tracks by ending the funding and arming of ISIS and related terrorist groups. It's not like you have distinct terrorist groups here, That's not how it works. You have warlords, you have freedom fighters, you have resistance to the drones, and you have jihadi terrorism, much of which goes back to Saudi Wahhabism, which is basically the paradigm for international religious extremism in the first place. So we've been creating this mess. We can shut this mess down with the stroke of a pen. And that's what we're calling for, nothing less. A peace offensive to shut it all down now. I'll mention a few other things. This is kind of the crisis that we're facing. Let me say a few words about how we can fix this, because the peace offensive is one part of it. There are a variety of other solutions that are good common sense, in the common interest, that are really within arm's reach right now. And I want to first underscore how much power we have. I want to just say that right now, because we're forever being told resistance is futile, you know, that the system is that strong, there's no point even trying to organize against it. You know, just give up and go home. But the reality is most people no longer buy into this system. The most recent poll done by the Wall Street Journal, and this was last summer in June, found that Republicans now account for 21% of the American electorate. 21%, that's a minority party. Democrats account for 29%, but 50%, which is the plurality, it's the biggest portion of the vote, it's almost a majority, 50% have divorced them both and do not identify with either Democrats or Republicans. Other polls show that almost 60% of people are begging for an independent political force, not Democrat, not Republican. So there's a huge force out there, and we're seeing that, in fact, in this election right now, because the two leading candidates in the last primary, and headed that way nationally, are people who are outsiders in those two parties, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. Neither of them belong to these parties. They are real outsiders, and the parties are also terrified at the prospects that they might potentially have a shot at the nomination. So, what happened in New Hampshire is this. The largest block of voters in New Hampshire is also independent. It's 40% of registered voters in New Hampshire who are independent. But are independents allowed a voice in the primary? No. The way the rules work in New Hampshire, you cannot participate in the primary unless you've already won a substantial amount of the vote. It's a grandfathering in law. So it's made to look from the very start like there is no independent voice, and they rely on suppressing that voice. And I have to just tell my political awakening really happened in the first televised debate that I was ever allowed to participate in. This was back in 2002 when I was tricked into running for office for the first time, having no idea what I was getting into. But it was like a shock. It was just a shock to see how responsive people were to our message all across the political spectrum. Because people who are too busy to pay attention to the details, they can smell a rat. And we in the Green Party were definitely not a rat. We didn't dress like a rat, we didn't talk like a rat, we didn't have the shiny shoes like a rat. And so there was real interest in our campaign. We were able to fight our way into a televised debate because huge crowds were turning out, and basically at the top of their lungs were shouting for open debates. So finally they opened up a debate, and I was allowed in, along with several other independent candidates. It took place in a television studio, so there was no live audience, but the ideas I put forward, like we've been talking about today, went over like a lead balloon, you can be sure, among the candidates and the moderator. But when we walked out and the debate was over, I was mobbed by the press, who told me that I had won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. I think you were there, weren't you there? I mean, it's like we were so shocked.
Against Mitt Romney, by the way.
What's that?
Against Mitt Romney.
Against Mitt Romney, yes, I should say. But we were shocked because I walked out of the debate thinking, oh, well, I tried. So that was like my real political awakening. And I saw suddenly in a flash, what a scam this is. This is a scam. They keep us away from the microphone because they are terrified that we are going to just take take it over the minute the public hears. So they're doing everything in their power right now to maintain the mythology that people have to stuff themselves into one of these little, pigeonholes in the Democratic and Republican parties. And we're seeing in Bernie's campaign, there's an incredible momentum right now for revolutionary transformative change. But that's not going to happen in a counter-revolutionary party. People are going to wake up to that. And whether that's because Bernie gets trounced, which is likely, highly likely, or even if he wins, he will, the Democratic Party will force him to be another Obama. And people will be very bitter. It will be another wake-up moment. And then they'll use Elizabeth Warren, in the next race. But, this goes on. And it's been going on for as long as we've been paying attention. And since, long before that. This is how the system works. But in the meantime, we have, a thing like the internet. And, we're able to communicate and educate ourselves and educate each other. And meanwhile, the neoliberal, elite, the oligarchy, is continuing to drive us into the ground. And while they may give a few concessions, even if Bernie was able to win, we might improve Social Security. We might reduce the interest rate on student debt. But we're not going to change the military budget. He's not challenging that. He's a big supporter of the F-35 weapon system, which has cost almost $1 trillion already. This is like an obsolete Cold War era weapon system that's detectable with World War II level radar. So the fundamentals aren't going to change here. So we are building for the long haul. And people say, well, do you think you're going to win? And my response to that, and I encourage you to use this, is I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not ruling it out. Stranger things have happened, like when New Orleans fell into the ocean, This is the age of the black swan right now. Very shocking and unexpected things are happening. And, I think we should not allow ourselves to be talked into powerlessness. It's important to recognize we have the power, not only because we are the political surge of the moment, that is political independence, which is ready to break away. But consider the fact that there are 43 million young people, and not so young people, because it's moving up generations right now, Gen Xers and so on, who are locked in debt, who are really indentured servants, who have no way forward. Now, here's the bottom line. 43 million young people is enough to win a three-way presidential race. Don't forget that number. And if you had to pick one demographic out there that's really good at self-organizing, what is it, okay? It's young people, especially young people who are in debt, who are also on Facebook and on Twitter and are highly networked and can get the word out. And what's the word? The word is this. If you want to cancel your debt, you can do that basically by checking the green box on the ballot on November 8th of 2016. So come out and bring everybody you know and your families and everyone who's in debt. Because if we mobilize a revolt of student debt, we can effectively cancel that debt on November 8th of 2016. And I have yet to find the young person who learns about that, who doesn't become a missionary for this campaign. So it's actually, not that far-fetched, to think that we, in fact, could even win this race. But I think it's really important not to get too fixated on the date of our win. We are going to win because the forces are aligned right now. For oligarchy, it is doing its thing. It has control over those two parties, which are funded by predatory banks, by fossil fuel giants, and by war profiteers. So whether the concern is student debt or whether the concern is the climate, and if you look at Bernie's and Hillary's climate plans, they're not that different. They're both talking 80% renewable energy by 2050, which is not enough. We have an emergency. And we need to what actually needs to be done. When Pearl Harbor was bombed in the Second World War, a state of emergency was declared. And within 6 months, we had transformed the economy. 25% of GDP in the course of 6 months, from 0 to 25%, was dedicated to fighting that war effort. So we're saying if we could do that in 6 months, in 15 years, we can completely transition to 100% renewable energy by 2030. And in doing that, we can also cure the emergency of the economy, because we're calling for a Green New Deal, like the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression. We're calling for a green one of those, and putting everyone to work, creating the right to a job, to a living wage job right now, a job that improves your community, that makes it more secure, healthy, and stable for you, for your family, for your community, for the planet, and for the world. This is not in the war economy, it's not in the fossil fuel or nuclear economy, it's in clean renewable energy, it's in sustainable and organic local food systems, which we desperately need as well, and it's for public, efficient transportation powered by renewable energy. In addition, we're calling for infrastructure, essential infrastructure, including ecosystems that need to be restored and cleaned up, and pipelines, that is water systems, and the good kind of pipelines, water systems, agricultural systems, restoring our forests, and putting an immediate end right now, immediately. As of the time of election, we are calling for an emergency halt to all additional new fossil fuel exploration and infrastructure. So we say no, not only to the burning of fossil fuels, but importantly to their extraction as well. Because we've used those numbers, you know, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, as the saying goes. So we use the numbers to cover up a world of evil here by saying, you know, well, our emissions are going down mainly because we are externalizing them by not reporting our extraction. We're making emissions possible by this massive explosion of extraction that's taken place under the Democrats and under Barack Obama. So those are some of the ways that we can solve this. And I want to drive home that 43 million is enough to win the race. Don't forget that, you know, and spread the word. And I think we have some flyers here, the student flyers,
Yes.
which I regard actually as our most important flyer, because that's really where the power comes. It's in fighting debt, it's in mobilizing that generation, and social transition has always been led by the younger generation. So it's not coincidence that the younger generation is basically got their hands tied behind their backs right now, working 3 part-time jobs, trying to keep a roof over their head, and trying to pay the debt back. So it's critical to liberate young people from that debt, not only so they can come out and vote, but we need that energy, we need that generational energy to re-envision what our future looks like and to help lead the way. So for all those reasons, I encourage you to take the student debt flyer. I know I have some in the car if you don't find them, John.
Yeah, I don't know if I have enough for everybody, but,
Okay, great. Yeah, you can pass those.
There's
I know
another
you
one over
have.
there.
okay.
Great, all right.
Pass it along.
And by the way, you can also download the flyers from our website, jill2016.com. All the files are
We'll have
there
some
on
left
the
over, I'm
resources
sure.
page, so you can pass them around. We're also setting up campus chapters for the campaign, so-called Young Greens Rising, both in colleges, in community colleges, at trade schools, and also at high schools, because so many people cannot afford to go to college now because they can't afford to take on the debt. So these are really important places to organize as well. So encourage people to spread the word, to get on our website, get on our Facebook page, especially because that's where the word really gets out, and sign up on our volunteer list, because we are hiring, in fact, so if there are people out there who have, who are interested in seriously committing to this work, we finally have a little bit of money. We did make matching funds. So we have actually thousands of volunteers that have signed up on our website now, and a lot of them are young people, so we will be putting tools in your hands to get the word out to fellow millennials in particular, to help, mobilize a generation that really makes the difference. Let me just say a couple other words about our agenda here, because it has enormous support. In terms of appealing to young people, as I mentioned before, we are the only campaign and the only party that opposes school privatization and the turning of our schools, of public schools, into charter schools, and also the use of high-stakes testing. We support reviving public education, fully funding it, and teaching to the whole student for lifetime learning, not dumbing people down. And I might add, not only dumbing them down, but driving them down the school-to-prison pipeline, and using these exams as an excuse to attack teachers, to demonize teachers, and using them as an excuse to close schools and privatize schools. This is not helpful to the cause of education, and Diane Ravitch is really good at marshaling all the data you need to show that this is not helpful. In fact, on the whole, it's quite harmful, especially to challenged learners to start with. For the cause of learning, we need to ensure that young people, that families are not in poverty, that they are healthy, that they have access to health care, that they are not being polluted and not surrounded by gunfire in violent communities. This is how we create a healthy education system, not through high-stakes testing. So we know how to fix that. A few words about police brutality, which is also an urgent cause. This is not rocket science either. And it's very important that we stop militarizing our police, that we stop using, let me put it another way, that we provide the citizen review boards at the community level, so that communities are controlling their police forces and not the other way around, and that we have full-time investigators that are at the ready to call to accounting all cases of death and serious injury at the hands of police. There's been enough of a free ride going on here, so it's time to put an end to that. In addition, we need racial justice not only in policing, but also in the courts, in the prison system, and in the economy as well. All of those things have to be addressed. So another very important step forward is to put an end to the racist war on drugs, which is criminalizing people. In fact, substance abuse should be treated as a public health problem and not as a criminal issue. So if science were used, for starters, marijuana and hemp would not be regulated substances, and if we had the good fortune of turning the White House into a greenhouse, and I had the honor to serve, one of our other first moves would be to actually use science and instruct the Drug Enforcement Agency to regulate drugs according to science rather than to some kind of wacky mythology, and to take marijuana and hemp off of that list so that they are not. We summarize this saying marijuana is a substance which is dangerous because it's illegal. It's not I've talked about foreign policy plenty, so I'll just wrap up here saying that, you know, we can have a world and an America that actually works for all of us. In fact, we can't have an America that works for us unless there's also a world that works for all of us. Because if we are busy bombing and nuking and God knows what else, the rest of the world, we're not going to make it, folks. You know, there's just no way. We're on one boat here, and either we're going to sail together or we're going to sink together, and better that we sail together. So we have the power to do this. We have the numbers. We have the vision. This is the world that we can create, not inside of political parties that are funded by predatory banks and fossil fuel giants and war profiteers. This is why we need to stand up with the politics of courage, and that means voting for our deeply held beliefs, not against our greatest fears. That politics of fear has a track record. It's been going on for quite a while now, but it's been very visible and really well articulated since Bush Coronator in 2000. And that politics of fear that told you you didn't dare vote for the candidate you wanted. Because, why? Because you were worried that we would have expanding wars, that we would be demonizing our teachers, we'd be attacking public schools and defunding them. We would be deporting immigrants. We would be offshoring our jobs. We would be massively bailing out Wall Street. Well, it turns out that politics of fear delivered everything we were afraid of. All the reasons. All the reasons we were told we had to support the lesser evil and to silence ourselves, we have gotten by the droves. The bottom line is that we can't be silent. Democracy needs voices, it needs values, it needs a moral compass. We don't have that moral compass if we give it over to the predator parties to tell it how they think it is or how they want us to think it is, which is not the way that it is. We have to be heard. We have to be a force in this game. So the bottom line is we say, you know, it's time to reject the lesser evil and stand up and fight for the greater good, like our lives depend on it, because they do. We can have a world that works for all of us, that puts people, planet, and peace over profit. The power to create that world is not just in our hopes, it's not just in our dreams. Right here and right now, it's in our hands. We can make it so. Thank you. If you're interested in helping to empower voters, we have a right to vote, and we also have a right to know who we can vote for and to hear from them. And by the way, if the rule for getting into the debates was changed, right now it's just the Democrats and Republicans who run this debate commission. It's really a pseudo-commission. It's not a public interest thing at all. And they set the rules so it will only be Democrat and Republican. But if this was a public interest commission, and it actually allowed people, candidates, who are on the ballot for a majority of voters and could numerically potentially win the race, if that was the rule, there would typically be between 3 to 5 people in the debate, and it would be a real debate. And that's what we're pushing for. So on our website, if you go to the volunteer page, just indicate that you're interested in that, and we'll keep you posted. We hope to start organizing actions around that, which could include an economic boycott of the sponsors of the debate. It could also include mass arrests and civil disobedience and sitting in places to ensure that we're heard as citizens. This is really, it's as critical as the right to vote. is to be able to vote for the candidate that really represents you. So stay tuned on that. Questions? Starting over here.
I'm Stanley Heller, and I just want to say that the video will be up on the Economic Uprising website, and you have full access to use it any way you want.
Wonderful.
Also, I'm a trade unionist over 40 years. A couple issues. One, love that you're bringing up Saudi Arabia. I've been working on that issue for years. You didn't say the word Yemen. And there's this incredible war, as you know, 8,000 dead, the whole country devastated. We're up to our ears in it. And very important development last week was Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut, said he opposes any more money going to any more weapons sales going to Saudi Arabia. So one of my questions is, how do we Green Party, you, lead the fight on that?
Great.
Second, could I ask
Sure.
a couple more?
Okay.
Second is a trade union thing. There's a court decision in California. A scab teacher is bringing this court case. It's going to go against the trade unions. They won't have the right to get dues as they always have. And they're facing the loss of 2 million members because of this. That's no lie, no exaggeration. If it goes through, it won't be decided till the summer, but if there's a fight, and if the Green Party led that fight, it might help stop it, and it would certainly be to the credit of the Green Party. 3, in September, the Connecticut AFL-CIO took a stand in favor of boycotts, divestments, and sanctions in support of Palestinians. And I didn't hear you talk about Palestine or Israel. And I want to ask you how you feel about that. And fourth, a bit of something I'm a little disturbed about. I saw you're over in Russia. And the position you're taking on Syria bothers me because I've been fighting the U.S. imperial adventures since Vietnam very vigorously. But over in Syria, it's not ISIS that's number one. It's not the West and not the Saudis that are doing the worst things. It's Assad and Russia and Iran. And now the latest report is 470,000 dead. And, you know, constructive engagement, or you had another term for it, collaboration and all that. You know, it's like an abusive husband getting together and talking out it isn't going to work. And I would hope the Green Party would have pickets of the Russian and Iranian embassies. So there's my panoply of questions.
Those are all really great questions, and I'll try to address them briefly. On the Saudi weapons, we just conducted another weapons sale to the Saudis, which was completed like maybe... Congress passed it about a month ago, and the president had 1 month to veto it. This was like another 1.5 billion worth of bombs and I don't know what else, but it was all bad stuff. Part of this 100 billion worth that we've sold to the Saudis over the last 10 years. And this is why we're calling for an arms embargo. And where we're looking to collaborate with the Russians, by the way, is in an arms embargo. You know, it's to collaborate in stopping all of this. It's not in having more war. And unfortunately, we've sort of been whipping up a threat to Russia in Ukraine with missiles, with nuclear weapons that we've placed along their border in Europe. So we've kind of taken a very aggressive position to Russia. If you imagined that the military-industrial complex really needed an enemy in order to continue to push the military budget and to argue for $1 trillion of new nuclear weapons and modes of delivery, which is what they have called for, you know, this would be exactly the plan. You know, Russia's military budget, you know how much it is? 60 billion, all right? Ours is $1 trillion. So the Russians can't afford a lot of war right now. There are many ways in which they have been pushed into a lot of defensive postures, and we need to start talking regularly to the Russians. We need to engage them. In the same way, you know, we did this with Iran, and it worked rather well. We need to use that model with Russia. We also need to use that model with North Korea, for that matter, because North Korea starts testing nuclear weapons when we stop talking to them and warmongering them. So, you know, I think that's generally the way forward. On the Saudi weapons, we are doing all we can to push the peace offensive in Syria and throughout the Middle East. And that starts with the weapons embargo, and above all, that means to the Saudis. So, as we go forward, we've been very focused on the petition drive, and it takes a lot of our time and resources. But now that we finally have some money coming into the campaign, we hope to be able to, do all of these things. That is, to fight for the petition drive, to raise money, and to begin to really conduct campaigns on the ground to really raise these issues and to force them, whether it's through demonstrations or direct actions, etc. So I'd say, it's getting coordinated, which is the key thing. About the California case and making union dues illegal, this is outrageous. This is part of what's been going on in both the Democratic and the Republican parties, that they have been basically tightening the noose around labor rights and around unions. And it's very important that they be called out on that, and that we stand up strong, for union rights, for teachers' unions, for the rights of workers to organize. And so we really put that front and center. I did not hear that the AFL supported BDS. That would be astonishing.
Connecticut.
Connecticut. Okay. Well, that's wonderful. That's really great. I think that makes you like the second union that has done that. And the Green Party took a stand on behalf of boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel and its war crimes years ago. It's been at least 10 years, and our campaign has also endorsed that. And this is part of our policy that calls for human rights and international law as the basis for foreign policy, instead of global military and economic domination. So we're calling for really divestment and sanctions, not only against Israel, but against Saudi Arabia as well, with whom we should stop collaborating. As you point out, the Saudis are, committing outrageous war crimes and human rights abuses in Yemen, which is another example of a failed state, really, which we created. Remember, Yemen for a while was it was like the model of how great our drone policy was working. And then all of a sudden one day it was, oops, never mind that. Forget what we said about Yemen being the model state, It's a model of how our policies really drive resistance. And we recruited people to the terrorist cause by using drones there. It's a case study in what a disaster our foreign policy has been. So I think that basically covers the bases, at least briefly. Yes?
I've lived in the US about 27 years. I'm American, probably, and I've grown up with opportunities I probably would not have had in France, also in terms of the environment. So growing up, I did study marine biology. I did volunteer in the Marshlands conservancies and different places, and then I ended up getting deeper into activism, and I have some experience with Sea Shepherd at the Cove and Taiji in Japan and other places. And I'm a little bit, I'm looking for where we stand exactly on climate change in terms that if you look at the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, the main focus is on fossil fuels. I know here a bunch of people have already heard me talk about this, but now scientific studies have come up, and I love that we would be differentiating ourselves with those ideas. Where do we exactly stand on the methane and the animal agriculture? Because it is pointed out as the main source of climate change, and I'm sure some people here have seen Cowspiracy, Forks Over Knives, the Campbells of Father and Son, and Louis Sayos with Racing Extinction. So I'm just a little bit worried as to exactly where in detail, because if I look at our platform on the national level, the animal agriculture, the methane, is really mentioned as a sub-point to a sub-point, and as the last sub-point. So it's kind of scary, because I'm hoping that we would be the party to differentiate ourselves into fighting climate change. I understand this, the military with 53% of our budget, but this is also equally important, and this is security.
Absolutely, and this is why our fight against climate change has 3 pillars. So one is clean energy, one is a sustainable food system, and that means local, plant-based, organic,
Okay.
non-industrial food systems. So animal factory farming is out.
Okay.
And that's right up there as 2 out of 3. And then the third pillar is public transportation. So it's very, it's very critical, not only, as you point out, the methane that's produced, but it's devastating to ecosystems and the wastes that are produced in animal agriculture. It also produces very toxic food. And, my background is as a medical doctor, and nutrition is one of my passions. And the kinds of foods that are coming out of animal agriculture are not good for you for all kinds of reasons. I didn't mention it, but this is one of the reasons why a Green New Deal pays for itself, because we get so much healthier, not only from the absence of pollution, of the fossil fuel pollution, but also because a largely plant-based, sustainable food system with a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables is so healthy for you. It would change the landscape of public health in this country. So this isn't just an idea. This happened in the country of Cuba when their oil pipeline went down and they had to convert overnight to a largely plant-based, sustainable food system. So what happened? You'd think everybody was depressed, their economy was crashing, you'd think their health would have really gone downhill. But in fact, what happened, this was in 1990, when the oil pipeline, went down from the old Soviet Union when it collapsed. So what happened was their death rate from diabetes went down 50%, okay, and that happened within a few years. People say, oh, I'm old and sick, it's hopeless for me. Well, that's actually not true. These are illnesses that we have to reinforce on a daily basis, by breathing toxic air and eating toxic food. That's why we stay chronically ill. And by the way, our health is declining in this country, and the income gap in health, one of the articles in today's New York Times is that gap has been growing and growing. Why? Because we deprive people of healthy, whole, and largely plant-based food system. That food is unaffordable. Where the food deserts hit hardest, people are hit hardest by these epidemics. So in Cuba, under this healthy food system, you had a 50% decline in deaths from diabetes and approximately 30% decline in deaths from heart attacks and strokes. So it was both the healthy food system that they had, but it was also they weren't breathing all the air pollution. And they had a transportation system that actually, encouraged people to use muscle power to get to transit hubs. And that's how our transportation system should work. So there's a win-win here.
And climate change also linked to some of the worst crisis places on the planet. Desertification and where people will take weapons.
Yes, exactly. And that's the other way that this pays for itself, because it makes wars for oil obsolete once we have 100% renewable energy. So yes, thank you for pointing that out. Okay. Reconstruct it.
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment and ask a question. I just want to say thank you for this. I'm very excited. I'm very inspired, by the way. It's a very good talk, and I'm very hopeful for you. I just want to thank you for this. Another question is, what's your opinion on the Affordable Care Act? And would you keep that as president, or would you enact a similar program to Bernie's, that Bernie's proposing?
What we would do actually would take Medicare, which in fact is pretty much what Bernie is proposing too. That we take Medicare and we simply patch it back up because it's had some holes knocked into it. So we need to patch up Medicare and then extend the age of eligibility down to moment of conception basically, so that you're covered from the get-go all the way, and you're covered comprehensively. And it restores your choice of doctor, your choice of hospital, facility, etc. And it saves us a ton of money by basically taking out the boondoggle for the insurance and pharmaceutical companies. Where we differ from Bernie, Bernie says that the Affordable Care Act was a step towards this. Actually, it's not. You can't keep piling on more complexity and take another little chink that you insure and then another chink you insure. Because every time you do that, you've created more paperwork, and we're spending like a ton of money tracking. If you go into the hospital, like everything you do, from the Band-Aid to your aspirin, you know, to your surgery, every little thing has to get tracked and figure out, well, what does your insurance company cover? And you know, it's just it's a make-work program for insurance companies. It's absolutely crazy.
Yes.
That money should be put into healthcare, and that's what we do with Medicaid. So basically, we differ from Bernie in saying we can do this now with the stroke of a pen. We don't have to enlarge the Affordable Care Act. The other thing that's different is that Bernie, you know, he's a team player, but he's on the wrong team. And so he has to kind of give cover and say that the Affordable Care Act is a good thing. But most of America hates the Affordable Care Act. We had it in Massachusetts, we called it Romney Care. So we had 5 years of experience, and we were saying, no, don't do this. It's going to bankrupt you. It doesn't help medical bankruptcies. It disappears the safety net. So if you actually get sick, you feel great because you got this piece of paper. But if you actually get sick and you need to use it, you discover it's got enough holes to drive a hearse through. So it's not what you need. By giving cover for it, it makes it harder to mobilize people for the next thing. Because 60% of Americans aren't going to believe you or agree with you if you're saying Medicare will be great and the Affordable Care Act was great. No, we got to tell it like it is. The Affordable Care Act was a boondoggle for insurance and pharmaceutical companies who got something. Okay, let's see. And by the way, are you in school, out of school?
I'm actually on a break right now.
Great.
Yeah.
Well positioned to get the word out.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I'm excited.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Stein, for coming here today and speaking with us. My name is Tyler Dohan. I'm currently stationed in Groton right now with the USS North Dakota. And first off, I want to say that I wasn't on my phone ignoring you. I was taking down some notes, so
Okay.
I want to clear that. But my biggest question is, we could sit here and talk about all your policies and what you like to do as president. But that's nothing if you don't have a conducive Congress to let you do that, or a conducive judicial system to help you with that. So what's your plan to rally people who get burned by the Democratic Party and who are Bernie or bust or Bernie or Trump? How are you going to rally them, rally other left-wingers to help you out? And what is your 50-state plan to take the legislator to help you?
Great. Okay, those are all really important questions, and I can answer them generally. So, if we were to win, okay, we would come in with an incredible mandate and an incredible grassroots force. Barack Obama had that, and when he won, he basically put his troops on the shelf. So, number one is, if we win, your work has only begun. So, just watch what you wish for. But, I mean, in reality, you know, we don't have a choice, you know. It's like, it's this or the abyss. So, I'd say, you know, we got to do this. And, you know, do it as hard and fast as we can. And if you enter the White House and you have the incredible sweep and power that it would take to get us in, it would not be an issue. We would fight the battles one at a time, and we would show up at the doorstep of our congressmen. You know, we would have coordinated campaigns specifically for the Green New Deal. Student debt, as it happens, the president has the power, actually by way of appointment to the Federal Reserve, to enact a so-called quantitative easing, and we can disappear student debt, and we can do that, you know, without permission from Congress. The president also has a lot of control over war policy, especially to declare peace. You don't need an act of Congress to declare peace. You shouldn't need an act of Congress to declare war. We don't do that. So there are some things that we can just do. There are other fights that we'll have to fight. And let me just say that it's very important that we dialogue with Bernie supporters. We have many Bernie supporters in our campaign that we're really delighted to have. And many of them have already stated that they will lead the walkout. When Bernie gets up to pledge allegiance to Hillary at the convention, that they will lead the walkout out of the Democratic convention into our camp, wherever that's going to be, hopefully somewhere. And there is this so-called Bernie or Bust campaign, which is trying to organize Bernie's supporters to basically leave if he doesn't get the nomination. And they've been trying to work with us. So we're just beginning to open up a dialogue with them. We're not going to endorse a campaign that says Bernie or Bust, but we would like to work with them on our common goals. And our campaign is one state at a time to make sure we're on the ballot, and then to establish, if we can do it, if we can continue the fundraising, to establish a campaign headquarters in every state. And the leading edge of that is the millennials who are in debt. And we are in the process now of setting up chapters in every campus that we possibly can to get that word out, and especially, to reach those 43 million people who could win it for us. Thank you.
Recently, the World Health Organization came out with some good science about red meat and processed meat. And it was very valuable information, and it was pretty much ignored because of the pressure from the meat industry and the various interests. What would you do to counteract that type of lack of truth, is what it amounts to?
Right.
There's truth there, and it's hidden.
Right. It's influence peddling, is what it is. It's backdoor policymaking through lobbyists and campaign contributions. We need to get money out of politics and get people back in. We need to eliminate private money. In my view, all political campaigns should be publicly funded. We should not allow self-funding by billionaires either. We need to have a political system that is, not subject to being bought and sold, and that will get rid of all of that influence.
What about like the revolving door? What would you do about the revolving door?
Well, we can have specific, in fact, we have called for prohibitions against revolving doors so that you don't install people into, regulatory positions unless they have basically signed the dotted line that they are not going into industry. And in my view, you don't appoint people who are coming out of industry to start with. There should not be a conflict of interest among our regulators, and that needs to be addressed. A climate emergency that requires a wartime level mobilization, because what happened in Pearl Harbor is small potatoes compared to the loss of all harbors that we are looking at if we allow the major ice sheets to continue heading towards breakup. And the latest science says that we could expect that, not just a few feet of sea level rise, but potentially 10, 20, or 30 feet of sea level rise as soon as in the next 5 decades if we don't take fundamentally concerted action right now. That's why we are declaring an emergency and an all-out wartime level mobilization to put an end not only to fossil fuels, but also to nuclear energy. And we're calling for the immediate decommissioning. It will take us a while to do this, but we're calling for 100% clean renewables by 2030. That means nuclear is out as well. On the third world, and this gets to your question before about Paris, it's really important to remember, while we were giving lip service, to a voluntary agreement, which even at that did not stay within catastrophic limits, talking 3 or 3.5 degrees centigrade of warming, whereas 2 is the absolute catastrophic, now recognized to be probably way too high. Probably 1 degree is all we could safely tolerate. We're getting pretty close to that right now. While we were giving great lip service, backslapping ourselves, Obama was declaring victory and how great this is, what was he doing and what was Congress doing behind closed doors? And this tells you how far we're going to get with a voluntary agreement. Because even while they were signing and celebrating this voluntary agreement, they were lifting the ban on oil exports, which is like building 350 coal plants. Right there. They were doing that. They were signing legislation that expedites permitting for fossil fuel pipelines. And they were also given the green light to another major pipeline, which is like the alternative to the Keystone. So there was just cloak and dagger stuff going on behind closed doors. It was really great to be there, and I actually had the wonderful experience of doing a workshop together with indigenous Americans from the Northwest, from the Pacific Northwest, and with the deputy negotiator from China, talking about how we, the people of the world, could get together and really raise our standards and make something happen. And you had a sense being in Paris where there was just this like sort of shock, because it was not only the climate summit, it was terrorism, and war that were all kind of converging. And then you had the lockdown on democracy that was also taking place. So it was like all the crises were happening right there in Paris. And the people who were there, who were kind of locked out and told, we couldn't march and demonstrate, we were gathering at the People's Climate Summit and having these really wonderful kind of heart-to-heart, soul-searching talks in this moment of great existential crisis, really, about how we could actually fix this. We actually could create a world that works for all of us. We could move to, 100% renewables, shut down the wars, fix the climate, and basically get rid of the oligarchy is what it takes. And they were so excited. I can't tell you how warmly our campaign was received, because for the Europeans and the Russians, for that matter, to see a spokesperson for peace and justice who was running as a presidential candidate, they were just like in shock and so like beside themselves with hope and joy that we the people actually, we can overcome these walls that try to divide us, and the minute we do that, we are really an unstoppable force for a world that works for all of us. Thank you.
I want to echo what the student said about just your delivery, and you have a very joyful and hopeful way about you, which I think when I listen to NPR every day and I'm following different campaigns, but there's so much negativity and so much anger, and you actually address a lot of the issues which are really uncomfortable, in which you're not just talking baloney like some people, but you still manage to maintain like joy about you, and that's really refreshing and really powerful. So just wanted to thank you for that. And then you had mentioned healthcare, so just a few things related to that I was wondering if you could speak about, because I haven't heard you talk about it before. But one thing recently in Connecticut, it's happening, I know in Massachusetts and all over the country, but the opium epidemic with heroin. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on just, you mentioned a little bit about marijuana, but just other drugs in general, and what your thoughts are on that, and if you have any ideas related to that. And then my sister just had a baby in August, so related to pregnancy and taking care of, once the baby's born, childcare and managing that. She has the kid in daycare, my nephew in daycare. So ideas related to that, and kind of like the family and how to foster the family and things like that. And then for LGBT folks, marriage equality was achieved because of the court in June, but trans folks still have a lot of issues that they're facing, and there's still employment non-discrimination. The ENDA, which is being talked about, and so was wondering what your thoughts are on some of those issues.
Great. Okay, those are all really important questions. On the issue of opiates, it's part of a general public health trend right now, where, it's like we have become a really sick society, and I think we have a predatory economy and a predatory politics, which is working for the wealthy few, and people are really being battered. And if you look at the big statistics, it tends to be lower income people who are really being slammed right now, and who are getting hooked into the drug use epidemics and alcoholism. And it's not just young people, it's also older, white workers in particular. So, our health is reflecting what's happening to us as a society as a whole. That we are in a society that is, it is predatory. It's predatory against the environment, and it is predatory against people in all kinds of ways. In the way that we treat immigrants, in the way we treat workers, in the way we treat unions, in the way we treat students. It's a predatory, pathological society right now, because the foxes are running the chicken coop, And in my view, the answer here is to get the foxes out. All these things are not like big mysteries how to fix them. The big unifying problem here is that the wrong guys are leading the charge right now. And they need to be basically shown the door as quickly as possible. A lot of these problems go away, including much of the underlying driver for substance abuse is coming from people who are locked out of jobs, locked out of good education, who are living in kind of a wasteland of disinvestment, communities that have been abandoned by corporations that got what they wanted, and now they are going somewhere else where the profits are bigger. So, there are very specific and concrete solutions here. We need substance abuse treatment. We need to stop criminalizing it. We need Medicare for all. This needs to be free and readily available for everyone, including people who are bouncing in and out of jail. We need to stop throwing people into jail for substance abuse problems, abuse and use problems. And we need to ensure that we have good quality schools that are teaching to the whole student for lifetime learning instead of trying to wedge them into corporate pigeonholes for how they're going to be best exploited for corporate profit. We need a society that's affirming humanity, and that is run, that puts people over profit. Because right now we're putting profit over people, and it is driving everybody over the cliff. So there are specific solutions, and there are more general solutions. We need a right to a job, as well as the right to health care and the right to quality education. There are experiments that you don't hear about very much with rats and drugs and heroin, in fact. And what you often hear quoted is that if you allow a rat in a cage to choose between sugar water and heroin water, that they will just take heroin water until they die. Now that's true if the rat is in a barren cage, but if the rat is in an interesting environment, a humane environment, where there are actually, there are interesting, there's interesting landscape to explore, and there are friends and girlfriends and boyfriends. That doesn't happen at all. You don't see rats that kill themselves on heroin. So I think we can learn a lot from that experiment and get us out of that rat cage and out of this rat race into a more humane world that we deserve. And a lot of these problems will just go away. On children and families and LGBT. So yes, we have a right to good jobs. We have a right to quality, excellent, as far as I'm concerned, on-site infant care at the workplace, so that parents who need to work can go back to work, but they can have continuing contact with their kids and know that they're being well cared for. And that should be provided as a right in the same way that healthcare is provided as a right. Likewise, family leave, child leave or family sick leave, a dying parent or a family member or a significant other. We need to, again, put people and relationships over profit. Our economy benefits by having a humane economy and humane policies, so that worker retention is far better and people do their jobs better if they're not worried about their sick loved ones or their dying loved ones. So in the end, we all benefit by treating each other humanely and with respect. And I think what happened on equal marriage is such a wonderful example of how we the people, and in this case, the LGBT movement led the way. The Supreme Court decision didn't come out of nowhere. The Supreme Court was really forced to do the right thing in the same way that the Roe v. Wade decision back in the 60s was forced to do the right thing by the strength of the women's movement. So when people tell you that you have to vote worried about the Supreme Court appointments and that that's more important than whether we have a climate that we can survive in, you know, or wars that are devouring us. You know, they say, oh, you got to vote for the Democrat because of the Supreme Court. No, that's exactly backwards. We have to stand up and tell the Supreme Court what to do, as well as telling Congress and the President what to do if you don't get the President you want. If you silence yourself, then you're going to get just one version or the other of corporate America. There are differences around the margins in the corporate parties, but those differences are not enough to save your job, to save your life, or to save the planet. So at the end of the day, this really is the time for a politics of courage, to lead the way with our moral vision. And if you have any doubt about that, just remember what happened under Richard Nixon, one of the worst presidents ever. Okay, what did we get? We got women's right to choose, we brought the troops home from Vietnam, we got the EPA, we got worker protections, and OSHA, and the Clean Water Act, and the Clean Air Act. You can just go down the list. Because we had a movement that was not intimidated out of our power. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. Well, we got it, and we're going to use it. Hold on to your hat, join the team. This is going to be a wild ride.
My gratitude and for all of you, for Jill throwing her hat in the ring and taking this extremely difficult, strenuous